Hey YouTube, RP here, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to walk you through some of the details of how I got my Lazy Susan for the rotating dome installed in my R2 unit. So let's dig in. So when 3D printing an R2D2, some find the Lazy Susan a little bit difficult. It really isn't difficult, it's just time consuming. And I have the Lazy Susan removed right now, but we'll get into what all goes into setting this up. But before we do that, let's talk about the hardware that I purchased for the Lazy Susan. You can, here on Amazon, you can see the Lazy Susan that I purchased. This is the aluminum heavy duty, 18 inches. It's only $35. It does come with some pre-drilled holes. This is what I got. I can provide the link for this so that you have access to it. But I printed the Mark III body, or the version 3 body of the R2D2 unit. And this is the Lazy Susan that I went with. So let me show you the actual Lazy Susan itself. So here's the actual Lazy Susan, and you can see it's, good size and diameter. When I purchased this, after I printed the ring, or I should say the Lazy Susan gear, it was too big. It didn't, I believe it was too big. I'm trying to remember now, but I did have to scale this down or scale it up. I think I had to scale it down. What I had to do in order to figure that out is this actually the file comes split in different sections, and this right here is just plastic welded together. I went into a slicer program and just carved out a little section of this, and then I measured it, meaning I just printed, the first couple of, layers all the way around, and then I fit it within the Lazy Susan to see if the diameter lined up. And then once I figured out what that diameter dimension was, I printed it at the right detail, or the right size, right scale. I wish I had those measurements. I tried to look them up. I don't have them. So you're going to have to do some math to get this printed to the right size of your Lazy Susan. And there's a lot of information online on astromech.net, a lot of different other builders that have, done this. So go do some research on how to print this Lazy Susan gear. But once you have that figured out, then you can go ahead and install the Lazy Susan. So let me show you how I did that. So here we are back at R2, and you can see that there is this ring that goes inside of R2's body that you print out. And this was also done in sections. I believe there are 6 different sections, and the sections go in a very specific order. So you can see here that section 1 sits next to section 6. So section 6 is on the right side of section 1. So it essentially, if you wanted to go left to right, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. And there are certain holes that screw to the body, and I have labeled these. You've got some rods in here that are very small rods, and they run all the way through the body, and then they attach with a nut at the end, and this keeps this ring secure. But outside of those additional screws that attach this ring to the body, there are other holes that are open, and those are for your Lazy Susan. So I believe there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On the Lazy Susan itself, I do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screws. And what I have done is I have just taken some countersunk heads or screws. I've put them into the Lazy Susan and then secured them on the back side with a nut and a small washer. Now, I could tell you exactly the length of these screws, but it's going to vary for your build. You'll need to dial this in so that when you put this down and after you get the dome on, you've got a very small gap between the R2 body and his dome. So let me install this Lazy Susan and show you what that looks like. So here, those screws just fit right down into those holes. And you can see there's a nice even space here that goes all the way around the entire R2 dome. And that space, based upon these nuts and washers, is going to dictate how high up this Lazy Susan sits from the body. So when the dome sits on top of the Lazy Susan, then you have a nice little gap between the dome base and the body itself, which I'll show you momentarily. So that's step one. Again, not time consuming, not difficult, but time consuming. It's trial and error, okay? Each build is a little bit different. This part gets a little bit interesting. Now you have the motor, and when you change the scale of your 3D printed Lazy Susan gear, you have to adjust the scale dimensions on that cog that attaches to the motor. If you do not, those will be out of sync and they will not, the teeth will not line up to the actual gear. So make sure that when you do your math and you're making any adjustments, that you get those correct. Now, best case scenario, you don't have to make any adjustments to the 3D prints at all. I had to. So it is what it is. But when you get this motor installed in the motor mount, you have to twist this motor out or in, and you will see that on the motor itself, the head or the shaft that comes out of the motor is displaced to the far side of the motor unit. And the reason that's not in the middle is so that when you turn this motor left or right inside of the motor mount, it is going to bring this motor cog away or closer to the side of the Lazy Susan. So I have put this in a position where the distance to the Lazy Susan is at the perfect distance. So when I put on my Lazy Susan gear, which you can see there's a recessed part where the gears are below this bar, and then there is another part where the gears are flush to the bar. You want to make sure that you put it so that the gears are flush to the bar. And I simply have some longer screws that are coming from the base of the Lazy Susan up, and then I have them secured with some bolts and nuts. So when I put this gear on top of the Lazy Susan, I just align it right to the gear teeth. And the other thing that you have to ensure is that the gear does not hit this top bar. Now, what this bar is for is you can actually power the dome lights through your main system. You'd have to reduce it to 5 volts. I'm running a 24 volt system. I did not do that. I have my dome running off of its own independent battery pack, which doesn't bother me because the dome is so easy to take on and off. I could go ahead and, put in the slip ring with the wires and let it spin. I just chose not to go that route. Main point is make sure that that gear has a nice clearance between that bar, so as his head rotates, it's not going to create any interference. So you can see that that Lazy Susan has a little bit of clearance because it's sitting on top of each one of those bolts that are attached to the bottom of these screws. Okay, now it's time to put on the actual dome. I'm not sure if you can see this, but in the dome, the base ring that attaches to the dome has some smaller little holes, and that's what you're going to line up those screws to. Now, I have 3 that are on the Lazy Susan. You could drill 3 more holes that would line up to all 6. To me, it was a little bit overkill. I only needed the 3, so let's go ahead and put this on. And you could see how simple that was. The dome is now on. It's very secure. This is not going anywhere. I have taken him on many test runs, and it stays on there very nicely. Now, there are magnetic systems that you can go with. There are so many different ways to do this, and there's no one wrong or right way. Maybe there's a better way. Maybe there's a better way than this, but this is how I did it, and this is what works for me. Now, you can see that the base of the dome, like I said, it's got about 1/8 of an inch gap that's evenly spaced all around the entire R2 unit. That allows for the head to freely spin without the dome getting stuck on top of the body. It's also very canon to how it looks in the movies. So the Lazy Susan part is not difficult. It's just time consuming. It's about making sure your spacing is even, and that it's even all the way around, and that nothing gets hung up on the motor against the Lazy Susan gear. So this works perfect. There's probably other ways to do it, but wanted to share with you how I actually did this on my R2 unit. So there you have it. Hope that this video was helpful and you found it informative. Like and subscribe. Ask me any questions if I can answer them. If I got the answers, I'll give them to you. But yeah, happy building.